Mira had one job in the palace kitchens, and it was this: eat first, and if she didn't die, everyone else could too. It wasn't glamorous work, it didn't pay well, but it kept her alive in a different sort of way. Invisible, unimportant, forgettable. Exactly how she liked it. So when the head cook shoved a silver tray into her hands and told her the Alpha King himself was dining alone tonight and needed a taster immediately, Mira did not expect to end up on her knees in front of him, gasping, her whole body burning from the inside out. She did not expect his hands catching her before she hit the floor, and she certainly did not expect the words that came out of the most feared alpha in the kingdom, low and rough, his amber eyes blown wide with something that wasn't rage. "Breathe," he growled. "I'm not losing you over a bowl of soup." Mira blinked up at him, poison still crawling through her veins, and thought, distantly, deliriously, "He doesn't even know my name." He was about to learn it, whether either of them wanted that or not. Chapter 1. Mira had learned, over 3 years in the royal kitchens, that survival was mostly about staying unnoticed. Unnoticed meant safe. Noticed meant questions. And questions meant someone eventually asking where a taster with no family and no papers had actually come from. So Mira kept her head down, ate what she was told to eat, and made herself as forgettable as the flour dusting the counters. Tonight, forgettable was not an option. The Alpha King wants his dinner tasted personally, the head cook, Bettina, snapped, already piling a tray with roasted pheasant and spiced wine. His usual taster is ill. You're closest. Go. Mira's stomach dropped. Personally? As in front of him? Unless you'd rather explain to his guards why his food went untested. Bettina didn't look up from the tray. "Third floor, his private study. Don't dawdle, and for God's sake, don't spill anything." Mira had seen the Alpha King exactly twice in 3 years, both times from a safe distance, both times feeling like she'd looked directly at something too bright to be looked at. He was not a man people approached. He was a man people avoided, out of pure animal instinct, the way you avoided standing too close to a cliff edge. Now she was carrying his dinner up 3 flights of stairs, hands shaking just enough to make the wine glass rattle against the tray. Small steps, she told herself. In, taste, out. He won't even look at you. The study door was already open when she arrived. Firelight, dark wood, maps pinned across one wall like he was planning something. And there, behind a desk far too large for one man, sat the Alpha King, Cade, though she'd never once dared think his name so casually before tonight, reading a report with the kind of focus that made the air feel thinner. He didn't look up. "Set it down." Mira did, hands steady through sheer force of will. "Taste it," he said. "All of it. Then leave." Simple enough. She'd done this 100 times for 100 lesser nobles. She picked up the wine first. The wine was fine. Sweet, a little strong. Nothing wrong with it that 3 years of tasting hadn't taught her to recognize immediately. The pheasant was fine too, rich with rosemary, perfectly cooked. It was the third dish, a pale soup, something new the kitchens had been testing all week that made her stomach lurch the moment the spoon touched her tongue. Wrong. Something in it was wrong. Mira set the spoon down carefully, the way she'd been trained to. No sudden movements, no panic that might alarm a room full of armed guards. "Your Majesty." The room tilted. She heard herself say something else, words that didn't quite connect to each other, and then the floor was rushing up faster than it should have, and there was heat spreading through her chest like she'd swallowed fire instead of soup. She did not hear herself hit the ground. She felt hands instead, large, impossibly fast, catching her before impact. "What did you taste?" His voice had changed completely. Gone was the flat, bored command from moments ago. This was sharp, urgent, close to her ear. "Mira, what did you taste?" He knows my name. The thought arrived through a fog of pain, absurd and glowing, the single clearest thing in a world gone blurry at the edges. "Soup," she managed. "Something in the soup. Guards." His shout cracked through the study, and Mira felt herself being lifted entirely off the ground, cradled against a chest that felt like it was carved from something warmer than stone. Mira's vision was narrowing, darkness creeping in from the corners, but she was aware, acutely, impossibly aware, of the way his arms had tightened around her, like he was afraid she might slip away if he loosened his grip even slightly. "Stay with me," he said, low and rough, and it didn't sound like a command anymore. It sounded like something closer to a plea. "I'm not losing you over a bowl of soup." He doesn't even know me, Mira thought again, right before the darkness finally won. He's never even asked my name before tonight. She didn't know, as consciousness slipped away entirely, that he'd known her name for months, that he'd simply never found a reason good enough to say it out loud, until now, with her poisoned and dying in his arms, he suddenly couldn't stop. Chapter 2. Cade had not left the healer's chambers in 6 hours. His guards had stopped trying to convince him otherwise after the 3rd attempt. His advisor, Reeve, had given up entirely, choosing instead to simply stand nearby with the reports Cade wasn't reading, waiting for a moment of attention that wasn't coming. "The poison was aconite," the healer said quietly, checking Mira's pulse for what felt like the 100th time. "Someone diluted it carefully, enough to kill slowly, not instantly. If she'd eaten a full portion instead of a taster's spoonful, she'd be dead," Cade finished. "She still might not wake." The words landed somewhere in Cade's chest like a blade. He looked at the girl on the bed, small, pale, dark hair spread across the pillow, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths, and felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he cared to admit: fear, real fear, not the calculated wariness of a battlefield. He didn't understand it. He'd lost soldiers before, good ones, loyal ones, men who'd fought at his side for years. He'd grieved them the way a king was permitted to grieve, briefly, privately, before duty demanded he moved forward. This felt nothing like that. "Your Majesty," Reeve's voice, careful, "the kitchen staff are being questioned. If you'd like to oversee it personally, later. The court is asking why you haven't addressed the poisoning attempt. They're saying it was meant for you." Cade's jaw tightened. It had been meant for him. The soup had been prepared specifically for his private dinner, tested by no one but the girl currently fighting for her life in front of him. If she hadn't tasted it, he would be the one lying in that bed, or worse. "Find who did this," Cade said quietly. "I want a name by morning." Reeve hesitated. "And the girl? Once she recovers, if she recovers, she'll need to be questioned as well. It's possible she was involved." The growl that tore out of Cade's throat surprised even him. Reeve took an immediate step back, eyes dropping in instinctive submission. "She almost died protecting me," Cade said, each word deliberate, dangerous. "She is not a suspect. She is under my protection. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me directly." Reeve nodded quickly and didn't argue further. Cade turned back to the bed, to the small, fragile weight of a girl he barely knew, and settled into the chair beside her like he intended to stay there for as long as it took. She woke just before dawn. Cade felt it before he saw it, a shift in her breathing, a small sound low in her throat, fingers twitching against the blanket. He was on his feet instantly, leaning over her before her eyes had even fully opened. Mira. Her eyes found his, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening with confusion. Your Majesty? You're safe, he said. The poison is out of your system. The healer says you'll recover fully. She stared at him like she couldn't quite make sense of what she was seeing. The Alpha King of the entire kingdom, hovering over a kitchen taster's sickbed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice hoarse. It was a fair question. Cade found he didn't have a fair answer. "You nearly died in my study," he said instead, which was true, if not the whole truth. I wanted to see it through. Mira's brow furrowed slightly, like she didn't quite believe him, but was too polite or too weak to argue. The soup. Did anyone else? No one else was harmed, because of you. Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe? Or surprise that her one small act of doing her job properly had mattered enough for a king to notice. "You should rest," Cade said, straightening, forcing some distance between them that he did not particularly want. "I've assigned guards to your door. No one questions you, touches you, or so much as looks at you sideways without going through me first." Mira blinked. "That seems excessive for a taster, Your Majesty." You have no idea, Cade thought, though what he said was, "Someone tried to poison my dinner tonight. Until I know why, you're the only person in this palace I trust completely." It wasn't strictly true. He barely knew her. A name, a face he'd apparently memorized without meaning to, the particular way she went very still and very careful whenever anyone important entered a room. But something about the way she'd looked at him last night, right before the poison took her under, like his presence alone was the safest place in the world to lose consciousness, had settled somewhere deep in his chest and had not yet let go. He didn't understand it. He wasn't sure, standing there in the pale gray light of early morning, that he wanted to. Chapter 3. By the time Mira was strong enough to walk, the entire palace already had a story about her. She heard fragments of it everywhere, in the kitchens, in the servants' corridors, even whispered by guards who thought she was too far away to notice. The taster girl, the one the Alpha King wouldn't leave, the one he'd threatened to burn down half the kitchen staff for. "They're saying he sat with you for 2 days straight," Sable murmured, helping Mira lace her uniform with careful hands. Sable was one of the few kitchen girls who'd ever bothered being kind to her, and even she couldn't quite hide the curiosity in her voice. "Didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat there. That's not—" Mira started, then stopped because she genuinely didn't know how to finish the sentence. "That's not true" felt like a lie. "That's not what it means" felt like something she wasn't ready to examine. "Bettina's terrified," Sable continued. "She thinks she's going to be blamed for the poisoning. Sent you up there herself, didn't she?" Mira's stomach tightened. She hadn't thought of it that way, that someone else might take the fall for what had happened to her. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know. Doesn't matter what she knew. Someone poisoned the king's dinner, and a taster nearly died proving it. Somebody's going to pay for that, and everyone's hoping it isn't them. Mira finished dressing in silence, turning the thought over. Someone in this palace had access to the royal kitchens, knowledge of the recipes, and enough patience to slip aconite into a single dish meant for one man. That wasn't a servant acting alone. That was someone with resources, someone with a reason, someone who might try again. The thought settled cold in her chest, right alongside the memory of Cade's voice, low and rough, telling her he wasn't losing her over a bowl of soup. She didn't know what to do with either feeling. She was summoned to the throne room that afternoon, not by Cade directly, but by a formal messenger, which felt somehow worse. The throne room was colder than she expected, all polished stone and banners bearing the royal crest. Cade sat upon the dais, looking every inch the alpha king the whole kingdom feared, nothing like the man who'd held her while she convulsed on his study floor. Beside him stood a woman Mira didn't recognize, sharp-eyed, elegantly dressed, watching Mira's approach with an expression that gave away nothing at all. "This is Lady Ophelia," Cade said, voice formal, distant in a way that made something in Mira's chest ache unexpectedly. "My father's chosen match for the alliance with the Eastern Territories. She arrived this morning." Mira dropped into a careful curtsy, keeping her eyes low. "My lady." Ophelia's gaze lingered on her a beat too long. "So this is the taster everyone's been discussing." Her tone was pleasant enough, but there was something underneath it, something assessing. "I hear you nearly died for our king." "I was only doing my duty, my lady." "Of course." Ophelia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Still, it's rare to find such devotion in the palace kitchens. Cade's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. Mira felt the weight of his gaze on her, careful and controlled, entirely unlike the desperate urgency of 2 nights ago. "You may return to your duties," Cade said finally, formal enough that it stung more than Mira expected. "The investigation into the poisoning continues. You'll be informed if anything requires your testimony." Mira curtsied again and left as quickly as propriety allowed, her heart hammering with something that felt uncomfortably close to grief. "Of course there's a betrothal," she told herself, walking fast down the corridor, refusing to acknowledge the sting behind her eyes. "He's the Alpha King. Of course there's an alliance to secure. Of course you were never anything more than convenient." She didn't see Cade's eyes follow her all the way out of the throne room, didn't see the tension in his shoulders as Ophelia's assessing gaze shifted from Mira's retreating back to his face, cataloging something there he hadn't meant to reveal. "Interesting," Ophelia murmured once Mira was gone. "You didn't tell me the taster was so memorable." Cade said nothing at all, which told her everything she needed to know. Chapter 4. Ophelia found her 3 days later, alone in the palace gardens during the 1 hour Mira allowed herself away from the kitchens. "You have excellent taste in hiding spots," Ophelia said, settling onto the bench beside her without invitation. "I've been looking for you all morning." Mira straightened immediately. "My lady, I didn't realize you required something from me." "I require quite a lot from you, actually." Ophelia studied her with the same assessing look from the throne room, like Mira was a puzzle she hadn't quite solved. "Tell me, how long have you worked in the royal kitchens?" 3 years, my lady." "And in 3 years, has the Alpha King ever once looked at you the way he did while you were dying on his floor?" Mira's throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you know exactly what I mean." Ophelia's voice stayed pleasant, conversational, which somehow made it worse. "I've negotiated alliances my entire life, Mira. I know what desperation looks like on a powerful man's face. I saw it on his the moment your name came up in that throne room. With respect, my lady, whatever the king feels or doesn't feel isn't my concern. I taste his food, that's all I do." "That's not all you do anymore." Ophelia leaned forward slightly. "You've become a complication. And complications, left unattended, tend to become disasters." Mira's stomach turned cold. "Are you threatening me?" I'm offering you a choice, which is considerably kinder than what my father would suggest if he knew a common taster had caught the Alpha King's attention before our alliance was even formalized. Ophelia's smile sharpened. This marriage secures peace between two kingdoms that have been one bad season away from war for a decade. I intend to see it through. You're going to help me. Why would I do that? Because the alternative is considerably worse for you than a bit of discomfort. Ophelia stood, smoothing her skirts. Discourage him. Make yourself forgettable again. Whatever this is, whatever he thinks this is, end it, quietly, before it becomes something neither of us can control. Mira didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, replaying every interaction, every unguarded look, searching for the moment she'd become dangerous enough for a future queen to threaten. She hadn't asked for any of this, hadn't wanted a king's attention, hadn't done anything except her job, badly timed and nearly fatal. Discourage him. The words circled endlessly, as if she had any power over what a man like Cade felt or didn't feel, as if she were anything more than convenient proof that he had a conscience. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, something she didn't want to name, small and stubborn and entirely inconvenient. The memory of his voice, rough and desperate. I'm not losing you over a bowl of soup. The way he'd sat beside her bed for 2 days, refusing to leave. The way his jaw had tightened in the throne room when Ophelia's gaze lingered on her too long. She was assigned to serve dinner the following evening, not as a taster this time, but as extra staff for a formal dinner welcoming Lady Ophelia properly to court. Mira had tried to refuse. Bettina had informed her, not unkindly, that refusing a direct assignment from the head steward wasn't an option available to kitchen staff who valued their positions. So she found herself standing along the wall of the great dining hall that evening, watching Cade seated at the head of the table beside Ophelia, playing the role of gracious host with the same controlled formality he'd shown in the throne room. He looked up once, briefly, across the crowded room and found her immediately, like he'd known exactly where she was standing the entire time. Mira looked away first. Discourage him. She could do that. She had to do that. Whatever this feeling was, whatever it had grown into over 3 strange, poison-soaked days, it needed to end here, quietly, before it destroyed an alliance that 2 kingdoms depended on. She just wasn't entirely certain, watching Cade's gaze drift back to Ophelia with visible effort, that her heart had gotten the message yet. Chapter 5. Avoiding the Alpha King of an entire kingdom proved considerably harder than Mira anticipated. She requested reassignment to the lower kitchens, furthest from the royal wing. She stopped taking meals near his private study. She kept her head down in corridors, ducked into side passages when she heard his voice approaching, made herself as small and forgettable as she'd once been before all of this began. None of it worked. He found reasons. A taster was suddenly required for his private breakfast, and somehow the assignment always fell to her, despite Bettina insisting 3 other girls were equally qualified. A misplaced ledger needed delivering to his study, and somehow Mira was the one sent to deliver it. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, standing in his study for the 3rd time that week, ledger clutched to her chest like a shield. "I believe there are other staff better suited for these errands." Cade didn't look up from his papers immediately. "Are there?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm needed in the kitchens." "The kitchens seem to be functioning without you at the moment." He finally lifted his gaze, and something in his expression made her chest ache uncomfortably. "Is something wrong, Mira?" "Everything is wrong. Your betrothed threatened me in the garden. I've been ordered to make you stop looking at me like that, and I don't know how. Because some foolish part of me doesn't actually want you to stop. No, Your Majesty, she said instead. I simply have duties elsewhere. Of course. He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, like he was searching for whatever she wasn't saying. You may go. She fled the study far faster than dignity strictly allowed. The next attempt at distance was more deliberate, grounded, intimate, and authentic, like speaking late at night to a close friend sitting right across from you. A relatable, thoughtful narrator who is conversational, effortless, and entirely unscripted in feeling. Calm, relaxed, and close-mic'd. High warmth, low performance anxiety. Avoid radio announcer projections or overly polished commercial cadence. The next attempt at distance was more deliberate. Mira made herself scarce during the hours he typically walked the palace gardens. She requested night shifts, ensuring their paths would never cross during daylight. She avoided the Great Hall entirely, taking meals alone in the kitchen storerooms like she had before any of this had started. For 4 days, it worked. On the 5th day, she rounded a corridor corner and walked directly into his chest. Careful, Cade said, steadying her with hands that lingered a moment too long on her shoulders before he seemed to catch himself and withdrew them. Your Majesty, I apologize, I wasn't watching. You've been avoiding me. It wasn't a question. Mira's mouth went dry. I wouldn't presume to avoid the Alpha King, wouldn't you? Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, quickly masked. I've barely seen you in 5 days, Mira. After everything, I thought... He stopped himself, jaw tightening, and looked away briefly before meeting her eyes again. Never mind. You're right to keep your distance. I have a betrothal to honor. It's not appropriate for me to seek out a member of my own kitchen staff so persistently. The admission landed harder than she expected, confirming everything Ophelia had warned her about, everything she'd told herself these past 5 days. It's not appropriate, she agreed quietly, for either of us. Something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or grief, or both, before Cade nodded once, stiffly, and continued down the corridor without another word. Mira stood alone in the empty corridor long after he'd disappeared, hating how right it felt to finally succeed at pushing him away, and hating even more how much it hurt. Chapter 6. Reeve found Cade in his study past midnight, papers untouched on the desk in front of him. We have a name, Reeve said, closing the door behind him. The undercook, Fennec. He confessed this evening under questioning. Cade's attention sharpened instantly. Working alone? No. Reeve hesitated, choosing his words with visible care. He claims he was paid, handsomely, by someone within Lady Ophelia's traveling household. The silence stretched long and cold. Say that again? Fennec swears it. A coin purse delivered through one of Ophelia's own attendants with instructions to make it look accidental. He didn't know who ordered it, only that the coin came from her party days before she officially arrived at court. Cade's mind raced backward. Ophelia's household had arrived a full week before she made her public entrance. Plenty of time to plant an undercook, to slip aconite into a private dinner, to eliminate a king before an inconvenient alliance could be questioned. But why poison the very man she'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry? Unless the alliance itself was the target, unless someone within her household wanted the Eastern Territories destabilized, a war reignited, a marriage prevented entirely. Unless Ophelia knew far more than she'd let on. Say nothing of this, Cade ordered. Not to the court, not to Ophelia herself. I want to know exactly who gave that order before I confront anyone. And Mira? Reeve asked carefully. She was nearly the one who died for this. Cade's jaw tightened at the mention of her name, at the memory of 5 days spent successfully avoiding her, 5 days of telling himself distance was the responsible choice. "Increase her guard," he said quietly. "Quietly. I won't have her caught in whatever this becomes." "And Mira?" Reeve asked carefully. "She was nearly the one who died for this." Cade's jaw tightened at the mention of her name, at the memory of 5 days spent successfully avoiding her, 5 days of telling himself distance was the responsible choice. "Increase her guard," he said quietly. "Quietly. I won't have her caught in whatever this becomes." Mira learned of Fenwick's confession the way she learned everything important in the palace, secondhand, through frightened whispers in the kitchen corridors. "They're saying it wasn't random," Sable whispered, hands trembling as she kneaded dough that didn't need kneading anymore. "Someone paid him, someone connected to Lady Ophelia's own household." Mira's blood ran cold. She thought of the garden, of Ophelia's pleasant, threatening voice. "Discourage him, or the alternative is considerably worse for you." Had that threat always been about more than jealousy? Had it been about protecting a plot Mira had nearly died uncovering entirely by accident? She needed to see Cade, needed to warn him, whatever the cost to her own safety, whatever Ophelia might do in retaliation. She found him in his study just past dawn, guards stepping aside at her approach with an ease that suggested new orders had been given regarding her. "Your Majesty, I need to speak with you." Cade looked up, and something in his expression, relief maybe, quickly guarded, made her chest ache before she'd even said what she'd come to say. "Ophelia threatened me," Mira said, the words spilling out before caution could stop them. "In the gardens, days ago, she told me to discourage you, to make myself forgettable again, or face consequences I wouldn't survive. I didn't understand until now that it might connect to the poisoning." Cade's expression turned to stone. "She threatened you directly?" "Yes." "And you said nothing?" It wasn't quite an accusation, but it landed like one. "I was afraid. For both of us. I didn't know what she was capable of." Cade rose slowly from his desk, crossing the room until he stood directly in front of her, closer than propriety allowed, close enough that she could see the fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "You will tell me everything," he said quietly. "Every threat, every word. I won't let her touch you." For the first time in 5 days, Mira let herself believe him completely. Chapter 7. Ophelia received Cade in her private chambers with the same composed smile she wore everywhere. "Your Majesty, this is an unexpected honor." Fenwick confessed. Cade closed the door behind him, watching her carefully. "The undercook who poisoned my dinner, paid by someone in your household before you'd even arrived at court." Something flickered across her face, too fast to name, gone before Cade could be certain he'd seen it at all. "That's absurd," Ophelia said smoothly. "I traveled here to secure peace, not sabotage it. Why would anyone in my household want you dead before the alliance was even formalized?" "That's what I intend to find out." Cade stepped closer. "You threatened Mira in the gardens, warned her to discourage me or face consequences. Why would you concern yourself with a kitchen taster unless you already knew she'd nearly uncovered something dangerous?" Ophelia's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. "I threatened her because she was a complication to an alliance my father has staked our kingdom's future on. That's all. I know nothing of any poisoning plot." "Then you'll have no objection to my guards searching your household's belongings?" "You'd accuse me, insult my father's household, over the word of a kitchen girl and a confession beaten out of a desperate undercook?" "I'd accuse whoever tried to kill me in my own study," Cade said, voice dropping dangerously low. "Whether that's you or someone beneath you acting without your knowledge, I intend to find out, tonight." The search revealed everything within the hour. Letters, hidden beneath a false panel in Ophelia's traveling trunk, detailed correspondence between her steward and a rival faction within her own eastern territory, one that wanted the alliance destroyed, war reignited, and Ophelia herself installed as sole ruler once her father was conveniently removed from power in the chaos that followed. Ophelia hadn't ordered the poisoning. Her steward had, acting on the faction's behalf, believing a dead Alpha King would destabilize the alliance enough to serve their purposes, with or without Ophelia's knowledge or consent. She hadn't known, but she'd suspected, and she'd threatened Mira anyway, terrified that any scrutiny into her household might unravel a plot that could cost her everything. "I didn't know," Ophelia said, when Cade confronted her with the letters, her composure finally completely gone. "I swear to you, I didn't know my own steward would go this far." "But you suspected something," Cade said quietly, "and instead of warning me, you threatened an innocent girl to protect yourself." Ophelia said nothing, which was answer enough. "The alliance is void," Cade said. "Your father will be informed of his steward's treachery and of your silence. What happens next is between your kingdom and mine, but it will not happen through marriage to me." He turned and left her chambers without waiting for a response, already moving toward the one place he actually wanted to be. Chapter 8. Mira was scrubbing pots in the lower kitchens, hands raw from hot water, when word reached her that the betrothal had been dissolved. She didn't let herself hope. Hope, she'd learned over 3 careful years, was a dangerous thing for a kitchen girl to carry around unguarded. But then Cade appeared in the kitchen doorway himself, the Alpha King, standing amid steam and flour and startled staff who dropped into hasty bows, and hope became considerably harder to ignore. "Everyone out," he said quietly, and the kitchen emptied in seconds, leaving only Mira, standing frozen with a pot still clutched in her raw hands. "Your Majesty, you shouldn't be here. I've spent 5 days telling myself I shouldn't be anywhere near you," Cade said, crossing the kitchen slowly. "It was the worst 5 days of my life." Mira's breath caught. "The betrothal is over. Ophelia's household orchestrated the poisoning. She threatened you to protect herself from suspicion, and I let political duty convince me to put distance between us while it was still unresolved." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "I'm done pretending distance is what either of us actually wants. Cade, I've known your name for months," he said, quiet and rough, echoing back to the moment she'd woken confused in the healer's chambers. "Long before you nearly died on my study floor. I told myself there was never a good enough reason to say it. Then you almost died, and suddenly I couldn't stop." Mira's hands, still holding the pot, began to tremble. "I'm a kitchen taster. You're the Alpha King of an entire nation. There's no version of this that makes sense." "There's no version of this I care to live without," Cade said simply. "I don't want sense. I want you." She set the pot down with hands that finally stopped shaking and let him close the last of the distance between them. His hands cupped her face with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the fearsome reputation the whole kingdom whispered about. Careful, deliberate, like she was something worth being careful with. "I don't know how to be a queen," she whispered. "I don't know anything about alliances or politics or ruling a kingdom." "I don't need a queen who already knows everything," Cade murmured. "I need someone who tasted poison meant for me and still looked at me like I was worth saving. Everything else, we learned together." She kissed him first, unable to bear another second of distance, and felt him respond instantly, one hand sliding into her hair, the other pulling her fully against him, like he intended never to let 5 days of distance happen again. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Mira pressed her forehead against his chest and let herself, for the first time in 3 careful years, stop being forgettable entirely. "Everyone will talk," she warned. "Let them," Cade said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I'm done caring what anyone says about who I choose to love." Chapter 9. The court did talk, exactly as Mira predicted, though not entirely how either of them expected. Reeve delivered the news carefully over breakfast the following week. Some nobles are furious, say a kitchen taster has no business at the king's side, alliance or no alliance. Others, he paused, something like amusement flickering across his face. Others think it's the most romantic thing to happen at court in a generation. The girl who tasted death for her king and won his heart doing it. Cade barely looked up from his letter. Let them argue amongst themselves. My decision isn't open for debate. There is one matter requiring actual attention, Reeve continued. Ophelia's father has sent word. He wishes to renegotiate terms. Not marriage, but trade. He's furious about his daughter's steward, mortified by the scandal, and eager to salvage what relationship remains between our kingdoms. Send terms, Cade said. Fair ones. None of this was Ophelia's fault beyond poor judgment born of fear. I won't punish an entire kingdom for her steward's treachery. Mira, seated beside him for the first time at the formal breakfast table rather than serving it, felt the weight of a dozen curious noble stares and made herself hold her chin high despite the urge to disappear entirely. Not forgettable anymore, she reminded herself, not invisible, not unimportant. It would take time to believe it fully, but Cade's hand found hers beneath the table, steady and certain, and that was enough for now. That evening, in the privacy of his study, the same study where poison had nearly taken her life just weeks before, Cade presented her with something small, wrapped simply, entirely unlike the elaborate jewels she'd expected from a king. Inside was a simple silver ring, unadorned, practical in a way that suited her far better than anything ornate would have. "I know it's fast," Cade said, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know the court will have opinions, that there's still politics to navigate, that you'll need time to learn things I've known since birth. But I've spent 3 years apparently noticing you without admitting it, and 5 days recently pretending I could live without you. I'm done wasting time." Mira stared at the ring, then at him, throat too tight for words. "You don't have to answer tonight," Cade added quickly. "Take whatever time you—" "Yes," Mira said, before he could finish talking himself out of his own proposal. "Yes, Cade." The smile that broke across his face was nothing like the feared Alpha King the whole kingdom whispered about, open, boyish, entirely undone. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and Mira thought, distantly, that 3 years of staying unnoticed had led her here, to this study, to this man, to a life she never could have tasted coming. 1 year later, Mira stood in the palace gardens, one hand resting against the small curve of her stomach, watching Cade cross the lawn toward her with the particular urgency he'd never quite lost since the night she'd nearly died in his study. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, settling beside her on the garden bench. "I'm perfectly capable of standing in a garden, Your Majesty." "Queen Mira," he corrected, smiling against her temple. "You've earned the title properly by now." She had, in her own way, Not through birthright or noble blood, but through a year spent learning trade routes and treaty language alongside a king who'd insisted, patiently, that she was worth the effort of teaching. Reeve tells me the Eastern Alliance is stronger than ever, Mira said. Ophelia's father sends his regards, and apparently his gratitude for handling everything so gracefully. Everyone forgets it started with a bowl of poisoned soup, Cade murmured, pressing a hand over hers against her stomach. I don't forget, Mira said softly. I taste it sometimes, still, in nightmares. But then I remember what came after. Cade turned her face gently toward his. What came after? You, she said simply, refusing to lose me over a bowl of soup. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, right there in the garden, where a servant girl had once made herself as forgettable as possible, and where a king had decided, quietly and completely, that he would never let her disappear again.